AITA for refusing to help my parents after they favored my sister's athletic career over my academic achievements? I never thought I'd be writing this, but recent events have forced me to question everything about my family dynamics. I'm Emily, and this is the story of how I went from being the forgotten child to the one my family desperately needs. Growing up in what I can only describe as an athletics-obsessed cult of two, my parents shaped every aspect of my life, though not in the way they intended. My father was a former college basketball star whose dreams of going pro died with a knee injury in his senior year. My mother was a gymnastics coach who spent her entire life trying to create the next Olympic champion. Then there was my younger sister, Lily, their golden ticket to vicarious athletic glory. She showed extraordinary talent in gymnastics from age 4, and with that first perfect cartwheel, she became the vessel for all their unfulfilled dreams. I remember the exact moment I realized I would never be enough. I was 8 years old, clutching my first-place mathematics certificate from the district competition. The familiar scent of chalk, dust, and rubber mats filled our house as I burst through the door, my heart racing with excitement. Mom was reviewing competition videos with Lily in the living room, the blue light of the TV casting shadows on their intent faces. "Mom, Dad, look what I got." I waved the certificate, the paper crinkling in my small hands. My mother's eyes never left the screen. "That's nice, honey." "Lily, watch your extension on that aerial. You're dropping your shoulders slightly." Dad walked past, carrying Lily's gym bag. "We're running late for practice. Can you show us later?" Later never came. The certificate joined others in a drawer in my room, a growing collection of achievements that seemed to exist in a parallel universe to the one my family inhabited. That drawer became my first lesson in self-reliance. If no one else would celebrate my victories, I would have to learn to validate them myself. The pattern continued through my childhood, each incident another brick in the wall between us. On my 13th birthday, they forgot entirely. They were at a qualifying meet with Lily. I spent the evening teaching myself differential equations, the math providing a comfort that my family couldn't. When they returned home late that night, tired but jubilant about Lily's performance, I didn't remind them. Something in me hardened that day, like chalk crystallizing on a gymnast's palms. While Lily perfected her routines in the gym, I found solace in the quiet corners of the school library. The rhythmic squeak of gym shoes and the sharp commands of coaches were replaced by the rustle of pages and the soft clicking of calculator keys. I taught myself calculus from borrowed textbooks, the complex equations becoming a language that made sense in a way my family never did. One memory stands out with particular clarity. I was 15, working on an advanced physics problem during one of Lily's practices. The gym was humid with exertion, the air thick with the scent of sweat and chalk. My mother passed by my corner, glancing at my notebook filled with equations. "Emily, why don't you try some conditioning with the other girls? It's not healthy to sit hunched over books all day." I looked up, hope flickering briefly. "Actually, Mom, I'm working on something really interesting. It's about calculating the optimal rotation speed for..." "Lily." Her attention snapped away like a broken spring. "Your form is slipping on that dismount. 5 more repetitions." The equation in front of me blurred as I blinked back tears. But even then, a part of me was already planning, already calculating a different kind of trajectory. One that would take me far from the suffocating world of competitive gymnastics. At 16, my life operated on 2 distinct tracks. During the day, I was the quiet, academic daughter who existed on the periphery of my family's athletic ambitions. But in the early mornings and late nights, I was building something of my own. The idea for my physics app came during one of Lily's practices, watching the younger gymnasts struggle with basic mechanics concepts. The development process became my secret rebellion. While my parents drove Lily to elite training camps, I stayed up late debugging code and refining algorithms. The soft glow of my laptop screen became my spotlight, the quiet clicks of my keyboard my applause. When the educational software company expressed interest, offering $15,000 for my creation, it felt like validation of everything my parents had dismissed. I still remember the day I tried to show them the contract. The paper trembled slightly in my hands as I approached them at the kitchen table, where they were reviewing Lily's competition schedule. "Mom, Dad, I need you to look at something. It's important." My father glanced up briefly, his coffee growing cold beside a stack of gym membership bills. "Can it wait? We need to figure out how to cover Lily's new coach. It's about an app one developed." A company wants to buy it, but I need your signatures since I'm underage. It could help with the coaching fees. My mother cut me off with a wave of her hand. Emily, we're talking about your sister's future here. Olympic opportunities don't wait for someone's homework project. The contract crumpled slightly in my tightening grip. In that moment, something crystallized inside me. A determination as hard as the calluses on a gymnast's hands. I smoothed out the paper and returned to my room, but not before hearing my mother's next words. Now, about that remortgage application. That night, I made two decisions that would shape everything that followed. First, I began seriously researching emancipation laws in our state. Second, I started my online tutoring business, using the rejection of my app as fuel for something bigger. The business grew in the shadows of Lily's competitions. While they traveled to meets, I built a client base teaching calculus and physics to students across different time zones. Each session was carefully scheduled around Lily's training times, each payment meticulously saved in a secret account. My room became command central for my growing enterprise, a second monitor hidden behind my textbooks, a business phone disguised as a calculator, spreadsheets minimized whenever footsteps approached my door. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using the same dedication and discipline they tried to instill for athletics, just directed toward my own goals. Every time they dismissed my academic achievements, I added another hour to my tutoring schedule. Every missed school event became another client added to my roster. The MIT acceptance arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because it was one of the rare mornings when everyone was home. Lily had a rest day between competitions. The envelope felt heavy in my hands as I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching my family's familiar breakfast choreography. Mom was reviewing competition videos on her tablet while Dad calculated travel expenses. Lily pushed her protein shake around, dark circles under her eyes betraying her exhaustion. I got into MIT, I said quietly, the words dropping into the domestic silence like pebbles into still water. Full scholarship. For a moment, the only sound was the soft whir of Mom's tablet, the muted voices of commentators discussing gymnastics techniques. Then Dad looked up, his forehead creasing with mild confusion. MIT? When did you apply there? 8 months ago. I told you at dinner. Twice. Mom's fingers paused over her tablet screen. Emily, we've talked about this. Your sister's Olympic window is extremely limited. We need to focus our resources. I have a full scholarship, I interrupted, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I won't need any resources. But who will help with Lily's training schedule? Who will film her routines when I'm working with other students? Mom's voice rose slightly. The state university is perfectly adequate. I'm going to MIT. The words came out harder than I intended, sharp-edged with years of accumulated hurt. I've already accepted. The silence that followed was different, heavier, charged with something that felt like fear. I watched realization dawn in my father's eyes as he finally, truly looked at me. Perhaps for the first time, he was seeing not the quiet, compliant daughter he'd taken for granted, but someone capable of making decisions that could disrupt their carefully constructed world. What happened next would replay in my mind for years. Mom stood up, her chair scraping against the tile floor, and walked to the window overlooking our backyard. The morning sun illuminated the empty practice equipment Dad had installed years ago. Uneven bars, balance beam, tumbling mats spread across what had once been a garden. Your sister needs us, she said, her back still turned. All of us. This is about something bigger than just you. I looked at Lily then, really looked at her. She sat hunched over her protein shake, her shoulders curved inward like a question mark. A muscle in her jaw twitched, the same tension I'd seen before difficult routines. But she didn't speak. She never did, not when it came to family dynamics. No, I said softly, this is exactly about me. For once. I turned and walked upstairs to my room, the acceptance letter still clutched in my hand. Behind me, I heard Mom's voice rising, already discussing adjustments to Lily's schedule. My existence, my achievement, dismissed and forgotten in the space of heartbeats. That night, I made the final preparations for my secret plan. While my family slept, I submitted my housing deposit to MIT, confirmed my scholarship acceptance, and sent emails to my most lucrative tutoring clients about my upcoming schedule changes. Each keystroke felt like another step toward freedom, another link in the chain of my carefully constructed escape breaking apart. What my parents never knew was that MIT wasn't just an escape. It was the culmination of years of preparation. My tutoring business had grown beyond simple homework help. I was developing educational software, consulting for online learning platforms, building a reputation in academic circles under a professional pseudonym. By the time I left for college, I had more savings than my parents had in their retirement account. Not that they knew that. The day I left for MIT, they were at a qualifying meet with Lily. I packed my car in the pre-dawn darkness, the neighborhood silent except for the distant sound of sprinklers. I left a note on the kitchen counter. Gone to State University. Will call when settled. It wasn't entirely a lie, I would call. I just wouldn't mention the difference in zip codes. The drive to Cambridge was 18 hours of alternating elation and doubt. Every mile marker brought a new wave of emotions. Fear, triumph, guilt, relief. I rehearsed conversations with my parents in my head, imagined scenarios where they discovered my deception. But underneath it all was a steady current of certainty. For the first time in my life, I was choosing my own path, regardless of the consequences. MIT was everything I dreamed and more. The campus hummed with intellectual energy, the air thick with possibilities. In my first week, I had more meaningful conversations about mathematics and physics than I'd had in my entire life at home. My roommate, a brilliant computer science major from Seattle, became the first person to know my real story. Her reaction, a mixture of awe and anger on my behalf, helped me understand just how abnormal my family dynamic had been. I threw myself into my studies with the same intensity my parents had devoted to Lily's gymnastics. The difference was, my passion fueled me rather than drained me. I took extra classes, joined research projects, and continued growing my online business. My professors became the mentors I'd never had, encouraging my ideas and challenging my assumptions. The hardest part wasn't the coursework or the deception. It was the lonely moments when I'd see other students with their proud parents during family weekend, or hear my roommate's animated phone calls home about her latest achievements. Those times, the weight of my double life felt heaviest. But I had underestimated how completely my parents could ignore what didn't fit their narrative. During our brief phone calls, they never questioned why my class schedule always seemed to align with Lily's training times. Never wondered why my voice sounded clearer on calls from campus than it had at home. They were so consumed with Lily's path to the Olympics that they failed to notice their other daughter was excelling in a different arena entirely. I graduated from MIT in 3 years, summa cum laude. The day of my graduation, while my classmates celebrated with their families, I sat alone in my cap and gown on the steps of the Stata Center, watching proud parents take photos of their children. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Hope classes are going well. Lily qualified for Olympic trials. That night, I accepted a job offer from a cutting-edge AI research firm in Cambridge. The starting salary was more than my parents made combined, but in their minds, I was still taking general education classes at State University, still the reliable background character in their Olympic-sized dreams. The irony of what came next still takes my breath away. In my spare time, I began developing an algorithm for analyzing athletic performance and predicting potential injuries. It started as a personal project, a way to process my complicated feelings about gymnastics and family. I never imagined it would become the instrument of both revenge and redemption. The algorithm began as a way to stay connected to Lily, though she didn't know it. I spent nights analyzing footage of her competitions, which Mom proudly posted online. Each video became data, joint angles, rotation speeds, landing forces. But as I watched her performances with an engineer's eye, I began to notice things. Subtle asymmetries in her movements. Compensatory adjustments that grew more pronounced with each competition. The mathematician in me saw patterns forming, and they terrified me. My work at the AI firm gave me access to cutting-edge machine learning tools. During lunch breaks and late nights, I fed my algorithm more data, competition videos, training footage, injury reports from gymnastics forums. The patterns became clearer. The program could identify micro-adjustments that preceded injuries, predict stress points in routines, calculate the cumulative impact of repeated movements. I published my initial findings under my real name, Emily Chen, knowing my parents never read academic journals. The response from the sports medicine community was immediate and enthusiastic. Coaches and trainers began reaching out, wanting to use the software. I gave a few interviews, carefully avoiding personal details. Each publication, each presentation felt like another step toward an inevitable collision with my past. The first warning came during a routine analysis of Lily's latest competition footage. The algorithm flagged multiple high-risk patterns in her performance. Increased loading on her left knee, compensatory movements in her landing sequence, subtle changes in her center of gravity during tumbling passes. The program predicted an 87% chance of a major injury within the next 18 months if these patterns continued. I sat in my Cambridge apartment, staring at the data visualization on my screen. Red warning indicators pulsed over frame-by-frame breakdowns of my sister's routines. My finger hovered over my phone. Mom's number pulled up on the display. But what would I say? How could I explain not only the algorithm but the years of deception that had led to its creation? Instead, I wrote a detailed paper about injury prediction in elite gymnastics, using Lily's data as an anonymous case study. I sent it to her coach's email address from a professional account, hoping they would recognize the warning signs. The email was marked as read but never received a response. 3 months before the Olympic trials, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my mother, using the gym's phone because hers was charging. "Emily, honey, how are your classes going?" Her voice had the distracted quality I knew well, the sound of someone watching practice while talking. "Fine," I said, looking around my corner office at the AI firm, where 3 monitors displayed various iterations of my algorithm. "Just studying." "That's good. Listen, I wanted to ask, could you come home for a few weeks? Lily's training schedule is intensifying before the trials, and we could really use an extra pair of hands. You could do your coursework online, right?" The irony of her suggestion made me laugh silently. If only she knew I was running a company division, that my coursework was being implemented in sports facilities across the country. "I can't, Mom. I have commitments here." The words felt heavy with double meaning. "Emily, this is your sister's Olympic dream we're talking about. Surely your general education classes can wait?" I watched the algorithm running on my screen, processing new competition footage. Red warning indicators flashed across Lily's form like wounds waiting to happen. "Some things can't wait, Mom." The line went quiet except for the familiar sounds of the gym in the background. The thump of landings, the squeak of uneven bars, the sharp commands of coaches. Sounds of my childhood, now filtered through years of absence and achievement. "I don't understand you sometimes, Emily," she said finally. "We're talking about the Olympics. What could be more important than that?" I closed my eyes, remembering every dismissed academic honor, every forgotten achievement, every moment I'd been invisible in my own home. "Goodbye, Mom. Tell Lily." I paused, watching the warning indicators pulse on my screen. "Tell her to be careful." I knew what would happen next, had known, in a way, since the algorithm first started showing its predictions. I watched the Olympic trials live on my office computer. My team gathered around me, unaware they were watching my sister. The moment it happened felt like slow motion. Lily's approach to her final tumbling pass, her takeoff slightly off axis, the landing that shattered both her knee and my parents' dreams. The silence in my office was broken by one of my engineers. "That's exactly what the algorithm predicted. The rotation was off by 1.2 degrees, just like in the simulations." I sat perfectly still, my face a mask of professional interest, as my sister's dreams ended on national television. Inside, something broke and mended simultaneously. The algorithm had been right, completely and catastrophically right, and now I had a choice to make about how to use that knowledge. That evening, I received 5 increasingly desperate voicemails from my parents. Each one made less sense than the last, fragments about medical bills, mortgages underwater, coaching contracts canceled. Their entire financial house of cards was collapsing, and they were finally remembering their other daughter, the one they'd written off as ordinary. I let them pile up, those messages from the past reaching for a future they didn't know had already diverged from their plans. Instead of responding, I began preparing the presentation that would change everything, a keynote address at the National Gymnastics Coaches Conference. My mother never missed this conference. This year, she would finally see her forgotten daughter in the spotlight. But before I could execute my plan for revelation and revenge, an unexpected email arrived in my professional account. The sender, Lily Chun. The subject line, "I know." Lily's email was brief. "I've been reading your research papers. All of them. We need to talk. Now." I stared at those words for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. In the reflection of my office window, I could see the Boston skyline blurring with approaching dusk. Behind me, Monitors still displayed the aftermath of her injury, medical diagrams, force calculations, the cruel precision of physics and biology reduced to numbers and vectors. I called her from my office phone. She answered on the first ring. How long? Her voice was different, harder, older somehow. How long have you been watching me fall apart through your algorithms? Lily, don't. The word cracked like a gymnast's hands on the bars. I found everything, Emily. The MIT graduation records. Your company. The research papers analyzing my competition footage. Did you enjoy it? Watching me destroy myself while you built your career studying my collapse. The bitterness in her voice made me flinch. That's not. I just spent 4 hours reading every paper you've published. Do you know what it's like to see your own destruction mapped out in charts and graphs? To realize your sister predicted your career-ending injury 18 months before it happened? The silence stretched between us, 20 years of unspoken words pressing against my eardrums. Why didn't you warn me? Her voice was smaller now, almost childlike. I tried. I sent the research to your coach. Our parents' email address. You sent it to their email. Did you really think they would read a research paper about injury prevention? They were too busy planning my Olympic victory tour. She was right, of course. I'd chosen the safest, most cowardly way to warn them. Part of me had known they would never read it, never connect the dots. I'm sorry, I whispered. Sorry? She laughed, a sound like chalk dust in the air. I just found out my sister is a genius who's been living a double life while I killed myself trying to fulfill our parents' dreams. And now you're sorry? Lily, No, you don't get to apologize yet. First, you're going to tell me everything. Starting with why there's a photo of a little girl who looks exactly like me in Mom's old coaching records, dated 3 years before you were born. My breath caught. What? I've been going through old training files since the injury. There's something wrong with Mom's old records. Pictures I've never seen, diary entries that don't make sense. And this little girl. Mom's handwriting calls her Sarah. The name hit me like a missed landing. Sarah. I'd never heard it before, but something about it rang in my head like a forgotten melody. Send me everything, I said. That night, I sat in my apartment reviewing the files Lily had forwarded. Mom's old coaching diary, digitized and organized by Lily during her recovery, told a story that made my blood run cold. Sarah Chin, born 3 years before me, a gymnastics prodigy by age 4. Pages of detailed training notes, growing increasingly obsessive. And then, suddenly, nothing. A gap of months, followed by a single entry that changed everything. Training accident. Sarah, God forgive me. She was too young for the routine. I pushed too hard. James says we can't talk about it. Never talk about it. Focus on the future. But how? How do we just erase our baby? The diary entries that followed tracked my mother's spiral into obsession. When I was born, she barely acknowledged my existence. But Lily had been her chance at redemption, her opportunity to rewrite the past. Every perfect routine, every competition victory had been an attempt to resurrect a ghost neither of us had known existed. I called Lily back at midnight. Did you know? She asked before I could speak. No, never. My voice sounded strange in my ears. But it explains everything. Mom's been in her room all day. I heard her crying. Really crying. I don't think she's cried since my injury. The revenge I'd been planning, the public humiliation I'd choreographed so carefully, suddenly felt hollow. We weren't just victims of our parents' obsession with athletic success. We were unknowing understudies in their decades-long performance of grief. What do we do now? Lily asked. I looked at my computer screen, where my keynote presentation for the coaches' conference still waited. The title slide glared back at me, The Price of Dreams, analyzing the physical and psychological costs of elite athletic training. We changed the story, I said. All of it. The conference hall was packed when I took the stage 2 weeks later. My mother sat in the front row, unaware that her daughter was about to speak. I could see the moment recognition hit her, the way her hand flew to her mouth, the color draining from her face. But the presentation I gave wasn't the one I'd planned. Instead of exposing our family's dysfunction, I talked about patterns. Patterns in data, patterns in behavior, patterns in the way trauma echoes through generations. I talked about an algorithm that could predict physical breaking points and about the harder work of predicting emotional ones. We can't prevent every injury, I concluded, looking directly at my mother. But we can learn to recognize the warning signs, not just in our athletes' bodies, but in our own actions. Sometimes the most important patterns to analyze are the ones we create ourselves. After the presentation, I found my mother sitting alone in the empty conference room. She looked small somehow, diminished by the weight of exposed secrets. "Sarah," I said softly, "tell me about Sarah." She didn't ask how I knew. She just started talking, 20 years of buried grief pouring out in a torrent of words. The story emerged in pieces: a talented child, a mother's ambition, a training routine too advanced, a tragic accident. The cover-up had been my father's idea, protecting their coaching careers, their reputation. They'd moved cities, started fresh, buried their grief in the pursuit of new dreams. "Every time you showed interest in anything but gymnastics," she said, wiping her eyes, I felt relieved. "But Lily was my second chance. My chance to do it right this time." "But you didn't do it right," I said gently. "You just created new patterns of pain." Healing, I learned, isn't a linear equation. It doesn't follow predictable patterns like my algorithms, doesn't yield to careful calculations. In the months that followed the conference, our family's recovery moved in fits and starts, 2 steps forward and 1 step back, like a gymnast learning a new routine. The first breakthrough came from Lily. During her physical therapy sessions, she started using my injury prediction software to understand her body's limits. She'd record her exercises, analyze the data, and make adjustments. The same analytical mind that had made her an elite gymnast now helped her reclaim her body on her own terms. "I'm thinking of coaching," she told me one evening during one of our newly regular video calls. "Not elite level, just teaching kids to love movement, using your software to keep them safe." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The daughter who'd been pushed too hard now working to protect others from the same fate. But there was something beautiful in it too, a kind of redemption neither of us had expected. Mom and Dad's journey was harder. They'd lost their coaching credentials after Lily's injury, their reputation in the gymnastics community shattered. Dad took a job at a sporting goods store. Mom worked part-time at a local gym, teaching beginner classes to toddlers. The humbling of their circumstances forced them to face what they'd been running from for decades. I found Mom in Sarah's old records one day, when I visited their small apartment. She sat surrounded by photos and diary pages, tears falling onto faded competition programs. "I see her sometimes," she whispered, touching a photo of a smiling 6-year-old. "In both of you. Your determination, Emily," that was Sarah, "and Lily's grace on the beam. Exactly like her." She looked up at me, her eyes clear for the first time I could remember. "I've been chasing ghosts for so long. I forgot to see the daughters right in front of me." The therapy sessions were my idea, but it was Dad who insisted they go twice a week instead of once. "We've got 20 years of damage to undo," he said quietly. "Better get to work." In therapy, the full scope of their grief emerged. Sarah's death hadn't just been a tragic accident. It had been the result of pushing a young child too far, too fast. The guilt had warped them, turning natural parental ambition into something obsessive and dangerous. They tried to rewrite their tragedy through Lily, while I became the safe one they could ignore. "We thought if we could just create one perfect athlete," Dad explained during a family session, "it would somehow make up for failing Sarah. We didn't realize we were failing you both in different ways." The hardest part was learning to be a family without the framework of competitive gymnastics. Who were we without early morning practices, without competition schedules, without the endless pursuit of perfection? It felt like learning to walk again, all of us wobbling as we found new ways to relate to each other. Lily found her footing first. She opened a small gymnastics school, focusing on fundamentals and fun rather than elite competition. She used my software to monitor her students' development, preventing the kinds of injuries that had ended her career. The parents loved her approach, a former elite gymnast who prioritized safety and joy over medals. "I had a kid land her first cartwheel today," she told me during one of our Sunday coffee video calls. The look on her face, it reminded me why I fell in love with gymnastics in the first place, before it became about Olympic dreams and perfect scores. My algorithm evolved too. What had started as a tool for injury prediction expanded into a comprehensive system for athletic development. Hospitals and sports facilities across the country adopted it, using the technology to help athletes at all levels train safely. Sometimes I'd get emails from coaches or parents thanking me for helping prevent injuries that could have ended promising careers. Mom came to one of my presentations at a sports medicine conference. She sat in the back, listening as I explained how the software worked. Afterward, she hugged me for what felt like the first time in decades. "You did it, Emily," she whispered. "You found a way to protect them. All of them." The final piece of our healing came in an unexpected way. During one of her therapy sessions, Mom suggested creating a memorial for Sarah. Not a trophy or a medal, but something that honored who she'd been as a child, not just as a gymnast. We gathered in their old backyard, where the practice equipment had once stood, and planted a garden. Each of us chose flowers that reminded us of Sarah. Though only Mom and Dad had memories to draw from, Lily and I felt connected to the sister we'd never known. As we worked, Mom told stories about Sarah. Not about her gymnastics prowess, but about her laugh, her love of purple popsicles, the way she'd sing while practicing. With each story, she became more real to us, less a tragic figure and more a beloved sister whose loss had shaped us all. Dad installed a small bench in the garden, engraved with words that seemed to capture everything. Sarah Chan, beloved daughter and sister. More than perfect scores and golden dreams. Today, my algorithm continues to evolve, helping prevent injuries in gymnastics and other sports. Lily's school has a waiting list, her balanced approach to coaching attracting parents who want their children to love movement without sacrificing their well-being. Mom and Dad, still working their modest jobs, have found peace in simpler dreams. My relationship with my parents will never be what it could have been, but it's honest now. We've learned to talk about hard things, to acknowledge past hurts while building something new. They've even started showing interest in my work, though Mom still sometimes gets that faraway look when watching gymnastics on TV. Sarah's garden blooms every spring, a reminder of what we lost and what we found. Sometimes I sit there with my laptop, working on new iterations of my algorithm. Lily joins me when she can, and we talk about our lives, our hopes, our healing. Mom tends the flowers with the same attention to detail she once gave to gymnastics routines, but gentler now, more patient. We're not a perfect family. The scars of our past still surface sometimes. In Mom's occasional obsessive tendencies, in Dad's moments of overwhelming guilt, in Lily's physical limitations, in my own lingering trust issues. But we're learning to support each other through the hard landings, to spot each other's blind spots, to celebrate victories that have nothing to do with scores or medals. Recently, I found an old photo while helping my parents downsize. It shows Sarah at her last competition, beaming at the camera with missing front teeth. Looking at her face, so similar to Lily's at that age, I realized something profound. The algorithm I'd created wasn't just about preventing physical injuries. It was about breaking the cycle of generational trauma, about learning to recognize dangerous patterns before they become devastating injuries, whether to body or soul. In the end, the best revenge wasn't exposing my parents' failures or destroying their reputations. It was helping create a world where other young athletes might be protected from the very things that had broken our family. It was learning that sometimes healing comes not from erasing the past, but from understanding it well enough to create a different future. Sarah's story, and by extension, our family's story, lives on in every injury prevented, every young athlete protected, every parent who learns to balance dreams with wisdom. We couldn't change our past, but together we found a way to transform our pain into something that might help others avoid the same patterns. And maybe that's the most important pattern I've learned to recognize. How healing, like grief, moves in circles rather than straight lines. How sometimes the deepest wounds can lead to the most meaningful growth. How the very algorithms we create to understand our past might help us chart a course toward a better future. In the garden that was once a training ground, 4 chairs now sit around Sarah's bench. On good days, all 4 are filled. 2 parents learning to love without conditions, 2 sisters building the relationship they never had, and the memory of a 3rd sister whose story helped us all learn to prioritize love over perfection, health over achievement, and the messy reality of family over the impossible dream of Olympic gold. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more real-life stories.